This one against Herbert Seidman. Herbert Seidman was a senior master in the United States. He was born in New York City on October 17th, 1920. He died August 30th, 1995. And at his peak, he was ranked among the top 10 players in the United States. He was New York State champion in 1961 and then again in 1971. Herbert Seidman. By the way, the ratings shown are the current United States Chess Federation ratings, according to Chess Life magazine, 1961. January 1961, I think, is the issue I used for these ratings. E5 here, knight f3, knight c6, and we get the Rai Lopez with bishop b5. Paul Morphy's defense with a4, the Columbus variation with bishop a4, knight f6, castles, and the closed defense with bishop to e7, rook e1, pawn b5, bishop b3, kingside castles, pawn c3, and we get Frank Marshall's counterattack, a very aggressive line where black is sacrificing his pawn to try to get initiative on the king side. It's Marshall's attack. It's named for Frank Marshall, who debuted this counterattack in a game against world champion Jose Raul Capablanca in 1918. So I don't know if he was world champion at the time. He was world champion from 1921 to 27. So he would not have yet been world champion when Marshall pulled this move out for the first time. Marshall's counterattack, named for Frank Marshall, the great American champion. So pawn takes pawn, and speaking of great American champions, Steiner's variation is e4. Hermann Steiner. Steiner lived from April 15th, 1905 to November 25th, 1955. He was a player, he was an organizer, he was a columnist. He won at Hastings in 29, he won at Berlin in 31, he won in Mexico City in 1935, he won in London in 1946. He was a New York State chess champion, I think, in 29, and the California champion 3 or 4 times. He was the United States chess champion in 48, and he won the U.S. Open in 1942 as well as 1946. He became an international master in 1950, and he made great efforts promoting chess in the United States and particularly on the West Coast. So you can put the name Hermann Steiner right up there with Paul Morphy, Harry Nelson Pillsbury, and Frank Marshall. He doesn't get nearly as much recognition as those other guys, but he was a strong player. So pawn takes the knight here on c6, and pawn takes the knight on f3. Bobby with queen takes the pawn. Now usually d4 is played first. This is actually marked as a mistake, and g3 is called for. But what most people are playing is d4, and after pawn takes the pawn, then the queen to f3. And the white eval bar has a smidgen of an advantage here. Bobby plays queen takes the pawn right away here. Bishop g4 hits the queen. Now queen g3, and the other bishop hits the queen again. Pawn f4 interposes. Now g5 attacks the pinned piece. That's marked as a mistake with rook e8 being called for. Black should play the rook to e8. That puts the question to white's rook. Now the rook is defended, so white can simply continue with d4. And after rook takes rook check, queen takes rook. And he can offer the trade if he wants something along these lines. Bishop should come to d2 to prevent rook e1. Okay. Not played. Instead, pawn g5, well, Bobby moved into a pin, and Herbert Seidman says, what do you do to a pinned piece? You attack it again. d4 opens the door. Now king h8 doesn't want to open that door as well, does he? Rook e5, marked inaccurate. The obvious point is to obstruct this bishop. Queen f2 called for. Yeah, queen f2, from whence it can retreat to f1. So, for example, if bishop h5, queen f1. Rook e5 was played. Pawn takes the pawn on f4. Bishop takes the pawn. And he's hoping to get a pin on this knight, no doubt. Well, knight h5 was played. Not going to give him a chance for bishop g5. And rook takes the knight. He was already willing to give up the exchange here, wasn't he? Don't threaten me with your knight. So bishop takes the rook. Now the knight to d2, finally activating his queen's rook. Rook e8, rook f1, marked as a mistake. Bishop takes the bishop being called for. So on bishop takes the bishop, we're going to see queen takes the bishop, queen takes the queen, pawn takes the queen, and I think bishop d5 is interesting. I'm only getting a thumbs up for that. Well, only. How about f5? Gets a star. Bring my rook over to hit that. And he'll bring his rook out of my line of fire. Right. Well, the eval bar favoring white here. Let's go back. Bobby Fischer with rook f1 to the chagrin of the annotator. Rook e2, a move equally despised to rook f1. And bishop takes f4, hitting the queen is the call from Ficklebot. Capture this, and I can take it with queen or rook. Take it with the queen and queen e7, or take it with the rook and rook e2. Hitting the knight. Now I can actually trade the knight for his bishop. All right, coming back. Rook e2 was played. Bishop d1. Bobby saw my move. So rook takes knight, bishop takes bishop. And now bishop e5 check is going to be winning, isn't it? Getting a lot of pieces lined up with the king. So he tries f6 to obstruct that diagonal. Prevents that move. And rook e1. Now, I actually wanted to trade bishops here as well as in the line I showed before. I get a star. This was the line in my mind so that I can grab up this pawn. And I've got a passed pawn that he has to be worried about. In fact, the eval bar says I am really crushing here. If he goes for a super attack on my king, I will defend with my bishop, which does double duty because it defends my passer. And this pawn is falling soon. So, right, I know this one's hanging, but I couldn't care less about these pawns. This is my pawn that's winning. In fact, you can't take because I'll just push. You have to try to get behind it. And I'll rook d7. You can take the pawn. And then I'm going to, you got this threat here. So I've got to get my king out of the rook's line of fire first. And you can super attack that pawn, but d5 adds another defender. And the eval bar really likes my position here. Come back. Rook e1 was played, and that's also awarded a star. Now bishop takes the bishop, queen takes the bishop. That hits the rook. The rook takes this pawn on b2, and rook e8 fork, defended by the bishop. Queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes. So that's a rook and a bishop for a queen, 8 points for 9. And he picked up this pawn at the start, so 9 points for 9. But isn't this just hanging? And Bobby didn't take this. To my surprise, he played h3. I guess he just didn't want to risk any kind of anything. But this comes with check, so I don't know. h3 was played, giving him a flight square. But you can see the bot agrees. This comes with check. Take the pawn with check, and then h3. You can even perhaps play h4, but h3 for sure. Let's say king g8. Well, it's the only legal move. h3. It says h4. If he gives you check, though, you've got a nice tuck away, don't you? That's my point. That's my point. And if you double your rooks, I'm going to give you check here, and then I'm going to move up my pawn. And again, the eval bar strongly favoring white. So a bit of a surprise not to see queen take the pawn. Instead, h3 from Bobby here, and his opponent didn't play rook e1. He played b4. Rook e1 is his best hope to keep the fight alive. On rook e1 check, then king h2. But look at the eval bar. Doesn't really much matter. In fact, you really have to come back. You can't, that doesn't work either. Never mind. That doesn't work either. Yeah, he's doomed either way, isn't he? It's just a matter of time. All right, so he tried b4. Pawn takes the pawn. Rook takes the pawn. Again, rook e1 being called for, but again, that's still going to be answered by king h2, isn't it? And you're just perfectly fine here. And it's the same thing. Where are you going to go? Up here and get forked? It's literally the same thing. It's just different. So rook takes b4, queen takes the pawn, check, king g8, queen g5, check, king h8, queen f4, rook a4, queen f7, hits the rook, rook g8, queen takes the pawn on c7, rook takes the pawn on a2, desperately hoping to pick up this pawn here. Queen e5 check, however, forces rook g7. And now g4, h6, queen b8 check, rook g8, c7. And black resigned. Please take my queen, and I'll take and get a new one. Don't take my queen, and I'll get a new one. Oh, yeah. If you try to get behind my pawn, I'll bring this one up. Let's give you the numbers here. 92.1. Again. 2850 single game rating. Beautiful chess by Bobby Fischer.